Her mother was accused of theft, but the little girl told the billionaire the truth no one else dared to say. Unfolded on a cold, restless morning inside Harrington Global, where the usual hum of printers and polite greetings had been replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed on every floor of the skyscraper. Employees huddled in corners, whispering nervously as security officers moved through the halls at a hurried pace, and rumors spread like cracks on glass. Someone had stolen documents from the CEO's private safe. Not just any documents, but confidential contracts worth millions. And the person accused was the one who seemed least capable of such a thing, Julia Brooks, a quiet cleaning woman who had spent years working invisible shifts and apologizing even when she hadn't done anything wrong. This morning she didn't walk into the building, she was escorted, trembling, as if the walls themselves were judging her. Her little daughter, Lily, clung to her hand. The 5-year-old girl, with pale blonde hair, a red dress, and wide blue eyes, looked far too small to be walking through marble corridors filled with adults who couldn't look them in the eye. She didn't understand the words being thrown around: theft, security breach, termination, police report, but she could feel the dread radiating from her mother like cold air. When they entered the CEO's office, the atmosphere seemed to grow heavier. The room was large, almost intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in a flood of light, but the brightness didn't soften the tension. Behind a sleek wooden desk sat Michael Carter, the billionaire CEO, a man whose presence alone could silence a room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair brushed neatly back and piercing blue eyes that could read a person in seconds. To his employees he was a force of nature, controlled, sharp, impossibly focused. But right now, he wasn't looking at numbers or charts. He was staring at Julia, who stood in front of him like someone awaiting a verdict. "Mrs. Brooks," he said evenly, "I want to give you a chance to explain before this goes any further. Did you enter my office last night?" Julia shook her head rapidly, her hands twisting together. "No, sir. I only cleaned the hallway. I never touched your door, I swear." "The safe was opened using an authorized code," he continued. "Only 5 people know that code. You are not one of them." Julia's voice cracked. I don't know anything about codes. Please, Mr. Carter, I didn't do this." Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve, confused by the fear in her voice. Michael noticed the child and softened his tone, though his face remained unreadable. "There is strong evidence against you," he said. "If you didn't take the documents, then someone wants it to look like you did." Those words hit the room like a tremor. Julia's breath quickened. Lily looked between them, sensing something was terribly wrong. She had been quiet until now, almost frozen from fear, but the tension in the room finally cracked something inside her. She stepped forward, her small shoes tapping lightly against the polished floor. Her voice, when it came out, trembled, but it was clear. "I saw who did it, but I'm afraid to say." Michael's head snapped toward her. Julia covered her mouth, stunned. For a moment no one moved. The air itself felt suspended. The little girl stood there, clutching the hem of her red dress, her fingers trembling, but her eyes locked on Michael's with desperate honesty. She wasn't lying. She wasn't guessing. She knew. And she was terrified. Michael slowly rose from his chair, lowering himself so he was eye level with her. His voice softened in a way nobody in that building would have believed. "Lily," he said, "you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you. You can tell me the truth." Her lower lip shook, and she looked at her mother as though asking permission to speak. Julia nodded weakly, tears already forming. Lily swallowed. Her voice broke in half. "If I say it, he'll be angry." The way she said "he" made Michael's stomach tighten. Someone had threatened a child. Someone inside his company had gone far beyond a simple theft. In that moment, something shifted in him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. He moved closer, carefully, as if approaching a frightened bird. "Lily," he whispered, "whoever hurt you, will never touch you again." I promise. She looked at him, eyes shining with fear and trust all tangled together. And with a trembling breath, she nodded, ready to reveal a truth that would change all their lives. Michael dismissed everyone from the room with a quiet, decisive gesture, and the heavy door closed behind the last security officer, sealing them inside a space that suddenly felt too still for comfort. Without the buzzing tension of outsiders watching, the silence grew intimate, almost fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter the fragile bravery Lily was holding on to. Julia stood rigid, unable to stop wringing her hands, while Lily clung to her mother's sleeve with one hand and to her own courage with the other. Michael walked around his desk and pulled a chair closer, lowering himself carefully so he wouldn't tower over the child. The sudden gentleness in such a powerful man felt strange even to Julia, who had only ever seen him brisk, controlled, and wrapped in the armor of leadership. Now his expression was different, searching, patient, protective in a way he didn't bother to hide. "Lily," he began softly, "I need you to know something important. Whatever you tell me right now stays between us. I won't let anyone hurt you." He didn't push. He didn't rush. He simply waited. Lily kept her eyes on the floor, her small shoulders rising and falling with shaky breaths. She looked as though she were fighting an invisible battle, one too big for someone so small. Finally, she whispered, "He saw me." Michael leaned forward just slightly, encouraging her without pressure. "Who?" She shook her head violently, hugging herself. "He said not to talk. He said, if I told, Mom would lose her job forever." Julia gasped and sank onto the edge of a chair, burying her face in her hands as tears threatened to spill. Michael felt something cold coil inside his chest. Threatening a child was beyond immoral, it was unforgivable. But he forced himself to stay calm, to keep his voice level and soft. "Lily, did this man hurt you?" She hesitated, then shook her head, though the tremor in her fingers told him she had been deeply frightened. "He just yelled. And he grabbed my arm." She touched her wrist lightly, as if still feeling the imprint of someone's hand. Michael's jaw tightened, a flicker of fury crossing his eyes before he smoothed it away. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. "That was wrong. And he won't ever come near you again." Lily's eyes lifted to his for the first time, wide and scared but also searching for reassurance. "But, if I say his name, he'll know I told. He always sees everything." The dread in her voice made Michael exhale slowly. Whoever it was, he had power over her, or at least she believed he did, and that alone told him more than she realized. Someone who knew the layout of the building. Someone who had access where others didn't. Someone who moved freely and unnoticed. An insider. "Lily," he said gently, "how about this? You don't have to say anything out loud. You can just show me, and no one else needs to hear it." She blinked, confused. "Show you?" Michael nodded and stood, moving to a cabinet where he kept confidential files. He retrieved a folder and laid out 5 printed photographs across the desk, the 5 men with access to the safe. He arranged them neatly in a row: Edward Norton, Mark Ellison, Ray Dalton, Simon Hale, and himself. Lily stared at the row of faces, her breathing shallow. Her mother turned her head away, unable to watch her little girl relive the moment that had terrified her. Michael stayed beside Lily but didn't touch her, giving her control of the moment. "You don't have to speak," he reminded gently. "Just look. If you recognize someone, you can point. That's all." Lily hesitated. She stepped closer, standing on her toes to see the photos properly. Her small hand hovered over Edward. Nothing. Mark, nothing. Ray, nothing. Then her fingers drifted toward the 4th photo. She stopped abruptly. Pulled her hand back as if burned. Her breath hitched. Michael saw the panic in her eyes and knew before she even moved. But then she gathered what little bravery she had left, lifted a trembling finger, and pointed directly at the photograph of Simon Hale, Michael's own assistant. As soon as she pointed, she jerked back and hid behind her mother, burying her face in Julia's skirt, shaking from head to toe. Julia wrapped her arms around her, horrified and furious and terrified all at once. Michael felt the air in the room shift sharply, as if the ground beneath him had tilted. For a moment he simply stared at the photograph of the man he trusted for years, the man he gave access to nearly everything, now revealed by a trembling 5-year-old as the one who had stolen from him and threatened her. It was betrayal on a level that hit deeper than the stolen documents. It was betrayal at the cost of a child's safety. And Michael Carter had a line that could not be crossed. This was it. But he kept his voice steady, turning toward the frightened girl with a solemn promise. "Lily, thank you for being brave." She peeked out from behind her mother, her blue eyes glistening, unsure if she had done something dangerous or heroic. "You helped the truth come out," Michael continued, "and now I can protect you." The little girl swallowed and whispered, "Will he be angry?" Michael shook his head with absolute certainty. "No. Because I won't let him anywhere near you again." And for the first time since she walked into the frightening office, Lily allowed herself to believe him. The hours after Lily identified Simon passed in a tense blur for Michael. He sat alone in his office while Julia took her daughter home to rest, and the building gradually emptied until only a skeleton staff remained. Yet the silence did nothing to calm him. Instead, it amplified every detail he kept replaying in his mind: the fear in Lily's eyes, the tremor in her small hand as she pointed at Simon's photograph, the way she hid behind her mother as if expecting punishment simply for telling the truth. This was more than corporate betrayal. It was personal. And it disgusted him. He scrolled through internal access logs and security reports on his laptop, his expression sharpening with each new piece of evidence. The camera outage near the safe had been triggered manually, but through a secondary override panel only a handful of people knew existed. The safe had been opened with his assistant's code, and access logs showed Simon had entered the executive floor late the previous evening, a visit he failed to report. Individually the details might have been explainable. Together they formed a picture too clear to ignore. Simon had used company security against the company itself, and threatened a child to cover his tracks. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had known Simon for almost 5 years. He had vouched for him in board meetings. Promoted him twice. Trusted him with confidential deals. And now he realized how skillfully ambition had disguised itself as loyalty. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Security Chief Ray Dalton stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a guarded expression. "Mr. Carter, you asked for an update." Michael nodded, gesturing for him to speak. Ray explained that they had begun reviewing all backup systems and discovered evidence of tampering that matched Simon's login. Additionally, a junior IT technician reported seeing Simon near the server room last night, something he had no legitimate reason to access. It aligned perfectly with Lily's testimony. Michael listened in stillness, but his jaw tightened with each sentence. "So it's confirmed," he said quietly. "It looks that way," Ray admitted. "Are you ready for us to bring him in?" "Not yet," Michael replied, standing from his chair. His reflection in the darkened window showed a man who was furious, but controlled, a dangerous combination. "I'll speak to him myself first." Ray hesitated, lowering his voice. "Sir, after what the girl described, I don't think he'll respond calmly." Michael turned toward him, eyes sharp. "Good. Neither will I." Once Ray left, Michael finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. But the calm didn't last long. A memory surfaced, something Lily had said earlier. "He always sees everything," those words haunted him now. He knew Simon was observant, calculating, always lurking where he wasn't needed. Lily must have crossed his path accidentally. Perhaps she wandered into the hallway outside his office that night. Maybe she saw him leaving the safe. Maybe she simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time. What chilled Michael most was knowing that Simon had grabbed her arm. She was 5. Barely tall enough to reach a doorknob without straining. The idea of a grown man intimidating her, threatening her mother's livelihood, using fear as leverage, it ignited a level of anger Michael hadn't felt in decades. He made a silent vow then. Simon would not only be removed from the company, he would face consequences far beyond termination. As he prepared himself mentally for the confrontation, Julia called his office phone. Her voice trembled even though she tried to steady it. She wasn't calling about her job, she was calling because Lily refused to sleep. The girl was afraid that, the angry man would break into their small apartment. Afraid he would yell again. Afraid he would hurt her mother. Michael felt something in him tighten, a protective instinct born not from responsibility but from genuine care. "You are both safe," he told Julia gently. "I'll make sure of it. Tell Lily that the man who scared her won't ever come near her again. That's a promise." "Thank you, sir," Julia whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know why you're being so kind, but, thank you." "It's not kindness," Michael said softly. "It's justice." After the call ended, he stood before the window, staring at the glowing city below. It struck him how easily fear spread, how a child's innocence could be crushed by one act of cruelty. Lily had stepped into his office that morning trembling, but she had still spoken. She had still tried to protect her mother. That kind of courage humbled him. And he knew that what happened next would determine the direction of everything: the company's safety, the truth of the theft, Julia's job, and most importantly, the fragile sense of security Lily had left. He straightened his suit jacket and pressed the intercom. "Ray," he said, his voice steady and cold, "bring Simon Hale to my office. Now." Tonight would not end quietly. When Ray escorted Simon into the office, the tension in the room shifted instantly, becoming something sharp and electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. Simon entered with the same confident stride he always had, but his eyes flickered with unease when he noticed there were no papers on Michael's desk, no laptop open, no sign of ordinary work. Instead, Michael stood near the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The city lights reflected behind him like stars caught in glass, giving him an almost imposing silhouette. Ray shut the door quietly and remained inside, taking a position at the wall in case things escalated. Simon's gaze darted between the two men, and he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, you wanted to see me?" "I heard there's been a mix-up with security." "Sit," Michael said, the single word carrying an edge that sliced through Simon's performance. The assistant hesitated before lowering himself into the chair opposite the desk, the faux confidence draining from his posture. Michael stepped closer, resting his hands on the back of the chair in front of him, leaning forward just slightly, enough to show he wouldn't tolerate lies. "There has been no mix-up," he said calmly. "The safe was accessed last night. The cameras were disabled. And your code was used." Simon's throat bobbed. I don't know how that's possible. Anyone could've." "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it was final. Simon froze. Michael circled the desk slowly, each step deliberate, controlled, like a man who already knew every answer and was simply giving his opponent one last chance to confess. "You were seen," he continued, his voice chillingly steady. "By someone who had no reason to lie. Someone who was afraid. Someone you threatened." Simon's face drained of color. "Sir, if you're listening to rumors." Michael let out a humorless exhale. "A 5-year-old girl pointed at your photograph with her hands shaking. Do you know what fear looks like in a child, Simon?" The assistant opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "I'll tell you," Michael said, his voice darkening. "It looks like a little girl clutching her mother's dress because a grown man grabbed her arm and told her to stay silent." Simon's mask shattered. Anger, Panic and calculation flashed across his face in rapid succession. She must have misunderstood. She didn't, Michael cut him off. Children don't fabricate terror. They don't invent the sound of someone shouting or the pain of being gripped too tightly. She saw you. She identified you. And your access logs confirm everything. Simon's breath quickened. He shifted in the chair, gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. He looked at Ray, then back at Michael, as though searching for an escape. You're destroying my career over a cleaning woman's kid, he spat suddenly, the venom in his tone finally revealing his true face. Michael stepped closer so quickly that Simon instinctively flinched. Watch your mouth, Michael warned in a low voice that vibrated with controlled fury. That child has more integrity in her small hands than you've shown in your entire time here. Simon's expression twisted with resentment. You're making a mistake, he hissed. You don't realize who you're dealing with. You think you can fire me and just expect me to disappear? I don't expect anything, Michael replied. Because you're not simply being fired. He nodded to Ray, who stepped forward, removing a folder from under his arm and placing it on the desk. Inside were printed logs, camera timestamps, and Lily's handwritten note describing what she saw. Michael didn't need her to testify publicly, her truth was enough to build the rest. Simon looked at the evidence, and something in him snapped. He shot up from his chair, slamming his palms on the desk. You'll regret trusting that brat, he shouted, spit flying, eyes burning with rage. Ray moved instantly, stepping between them, but Michael didn't flinch. Don't ever raise your voice about her again, Michael said, each word like iron. And don't forget she saved this company from the damage you tried to cause. She ruined everything. Simon barked. If she hadn't, Michael interrupted, you would have successfully framed her mother. You would have stolen from me. And you might have gotten away with it. Simon froze, breathing hard, realization spreading over his face as he understood that he had confessed without meaning to. Michael nodded at Ray. Call the police. Already done, Ray replied. Within minutes officers arrived, entering the office with firm steps. Simon tried to twist away, tried arguing, yelling, even pleading, but the moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, something inside Michael finally settled. Justice, real, immediate, undeniable, had begun. As they dragged Simon out, he threw one last furious glance at Michael. This isn't over. Michael didn't bother responding. When the door closed behind them, the room felt different, calmer, yet heavier with the weight of what had nearly happened. Michael exhaled slowly, the fury inside him dimming just enough for clarity to return. A child had stopped all of this. A frightened little girl with trembling hands had saved her mother and his company. He sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he let himself feel the full weight of gratitude, not for the evidence, but for the small, brave voice that had dared to speak. The news of Simon's arrest spread through the building faster than wildfire, reshaping the atmosphere entirely. Where there had been suspicion and unease, there was now shock, disbelief, and a quiet, simmering guilt among the staff who had so quickly assumed Julia was responsible. But Michael wasn't thinking about office gossip or reputations. The moment Simon was taken away, he left the company matters to Ray and went straight to find Julia and Lily. He called their small apartment, and when Julia's trembling voice answered, he could hear Lily crying softly in the background, the kind of exhausted crying that comes from fear rather than physical pain. He told them he was coming over personally. Julia tried to protest, "Sir, please, I don't want you to waste your time," but he gently insisted. He needed to see that they were safe with his own eyes. Snow had begun falling again when he arrived at their modest building, the worn brick facade illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. It startled him to realize that his own company building had janitors earning barely enough to live in places like this. He had never once considered where his employees went home to. When he knocked, Julia opened the door with tear-stained cheeks, her exhaustion visible even before she spoke. Lily stood behind her, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Her eyes were puffy, but she was awake, staring up at him with a mixture of fear and relief. Michael stepped inside, lowering himself to Lily's height immediately. He spoke softly, the same calm tone he had used in his office, the tone that had helped her speak the truth. "You're safe now," he told her. "He's gone." Lily blinked, and her lower lip trembled. He can't come here." "No," Michael said, shaking his head firmly. "He won't come near you ever again." Slowly, her tiny shoulders loosened. She reached out, hesitantly at first, then fully wrapping her arms around his neck in a sudden hug. The gesture stunned him. For a moment he simply held her, feeling the fragility and trust in that small embrace, realizing that she hadn't had many people in her life she could cling to. Julia pressed a hand to her mouth, emotional at the sight. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You believed her when no one else did." "She earned that belief herself," he replied. "She's incredibly brave." They sat together in the small living room, and Lily curled up close to her mother, still holding her rabbit but watching Michael carefully, as if studying him. He noticed the peeling paint on the walls, the outdated heater rattling in the corner, the thin curtains that didn't fully block the cold. It struck him that Lily lived here every day, in fear of losing the only person she had, with a mother doing her best but struggling. And a powerful, undeniable thought took root in him: he wanted to give them more. Not out of charity, not out of guilt, but because Lily deserved a world where she didn't have to be afraid of men like Simon or worried about her mother losing a job she never should have been threatened over. "Julia," he said gently, "I want you to take the next week off. Fully paid. Spend time with Lily. She's been through more than any child should." Julia shook her head quickly. "I can't. I'm already afraid I'll be fired." "You're not being fired," he replied firmly. "And you never will be for something you didn't do." Tears rose again in her eyes, but this time they were from relief. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Lily tugged on his sleeve then, her voice soft. "Will you come again?" The question pierced him with an unexpected warmth. She wasn't asking out of politeness. She genuinely wanted him there, because he had made her feel safe. He gave a slow nod. "If you want me to, yes." She nodded back, satisfied, as if she had made an important decision. After sitting with them a while longer, making sure Lily had calmed enough to sleep, he finally stood to leave. But before he stepped out the door, Julia stopped him with a hesitant voice. "Mr. Carter, why are you doing all this?" He paused, hand on the doorframe, then looked back at her thoughtfully. "Because your daughter showed more honesty and courage than most adults I know," he said. "And because no child should ever pay the price for someone else's greed." When he walked back out into the snowy night, he realized how deeply this family had already begun to matter to him. It was no longer just about justice or company loyalty. It was about protecting a little girl who had protected others first. And as he drove home, the snow falling thicker around him, one thought kept returning over and over: he wasn't done helping them. Not even close. Michael returned to his mansion that night with a heaviness he couldn't shake, despite the relief of Simon's arrest. The winding driveway, the polished marble entryway, the vast quiet halls, none of it felt the same. He had built his life on control and order, convinced that the structure he maintained would protect him from chaos. But chaos hadn't come for him directly. It had come for a child who never asked to be involved, a little girl whose world was too small to defend herself inside a giant corporation where adults played dangerous games. He found himself sitting in his private study long after midnight, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace and thinking about Lily's trembling voice and the way she'd clung to him with such desperate trust. He wondered how long she had lived with fear even before all of this. Children rarely trembled over one incident alone. Fear had roots. And he suspected Lily's life had not been nearly as gentle as she deserved. The next morning he woke early, unable to rest. He dressed without his usual deliberation and arrived at the office before anyone else, driven by a restless need to clean up every thread that Simon had tried to entangle. Meetings followed one after another, security updates, legal consultations, board discussions, yet his mind returned constantly to that small apartment with thin walls and a little girl curled up with a stuffed rabbit. Even as he sat in the boardroom surrounded by executives, he felt the absence of something. Or rather, the presence of a responsibility he had not yet fulfilled. By noon he found himself standing in front of Julia and Lily's building again, almost surprised at his own impulse to return so soon. He rang the bell, and when the door opened, Lily was the one who peeked out first. Her hair was still tousled from sleep, and she held her rabbit tucked under one arm, but the panic that had filled her eyes the day before had softened into cautious curiosity. When she recognized him, her expression brightened in a small, shy way that didn't match the fear she had carried earlier. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, almost as if naming a character from a storybook. Julia appeared behind her, embarrassed and flustered, apologizing for the mess, the laundry basket in the corner, the blankets on the couch. He brushed it all aside politely. It wasn't the clutter that drew his attention, it was the fragility of their life here, a life held together with more willpower than resources. He brought lunch with him, something simple but warm, and they ate at the small kitchen table. Lily sat beside him, leaning slightly toward him as though seeking reassurance, though she never said it outright. Julia kept thanking him between bites, her gratitude almost painful to hear. When they finished, Lily took his hand and led him to her tiny bedroom, barely big enough for a bed and a shelf. She showed him her drawings, each one bright but somehow lonely, houses, clouds, animals, but rarely people. "Do you like to draw?" he asked. She nodded. "Mom says I'm good. But I don't have many colors." He looked at the cup that held only 3 broken crayons and felt something twist inside him. Later that afternoon, back in his office, he made several quiet phone calls. He arranged a private security detail to watch their building discreetly, ensuring that no one, least of all Simon's associates, would come near them. He contacted an employee housing program and asked for the best available apartment, specifying safety, location, and comfort. He called a private school and inquired about scholarships, not the kind offered through public announcements, but the kind only boards approved for exceptional cases. Finally, he called a therapist who specialized in child trauma, wanting to ensure Lily had someone to talk to beyond her mother. He didn't announce these decisions. He didn't frame them as charity. He simply made them because he knew they were necessary. The next few days passed quietly, and Lily's apartment became part of Michael's routine. Some days he visited after work to bring books or help her with small reading exercises. Other days he simply checked in with Julia to ensure she wasn't overwhelmed. Lily grew more comfortable around him, often climbing onto the couch beside him during his visits or silently taking his hand when she felt uncertain. He found himself smiling more than he expected, not out of politeness but from a genuine warmth he hadn't felt in years. One evening he found Lily sitting at the window, staring at the streetlights below. She looked deep in thought, far too serious for a child her age. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, taking a seat beside her. "If the bad man remembers my face," she answered quietly, not looking away from the window. He inhaled slowly. "He's in jail. He won't come out for a long time. And even when he does, he won't be anywhere near you. I promise you that." She nodded but didn't fully relax. So he added, "And if he ever tried to come close, he would have to get through me first." That made her look up. She studied him with a solemn expression, as though measuring the weight of his words. Then she reached out and leaned gently against his arm. It was such a small gesture, but it struck him deeply, a sign that she trusted him, that she saw him as someone safe. He rested a careful hand on her back, anchoring her in the reassurance she needed. Julia watched from the doorway, her hand over her heart. She had never expected a billionaire CEO to sit beside her daughter like a father figure, speaking to her with patience and tenderness. And yet there he was, fitting into the dim little room as naturally as if he had always belonged in their world. Michael didn't see it yet, but something fundamental had begun shifting inside him. The anger he felt toward Simon had settled into a quiet determination to rebuild what the man had tried to break. Not just the company. Not just his own sense of trust. But Lily's safety, her confidence, her childhood. The world had failed her once. He would not let it fail her again. That night, as he left the apartment, Lily ran to the door and waved at him with the kind of sincerity only a child could offer. "Come tomorrow?" she asked, hopeful. He smiled, a real one that softened the stern lines of his face. "I will," he promised. And as he walked into the cool night air, he knew with absolute certainty that he meant it. The following week unfolded like a slow sunrise, each day bringing a little more light into a life that had been dim for far too long. Lily grew calmer, sleeping without waking from nightmares, and her smile appeared more freely, sometimes catching Michael off guard with how genuine and unguarded it was. Julia noticed the change too. She still moved carefully around him, unsure how to navigate the presence of a billionaire who had inexplicably stepped into their world with the gentleness of someone who wasn't trying to impress or expect anything in return. She often watched, half in awe and half in disbelief, when Lily would take Michael's hand without hesitation, guiding him to show something she had drawn, or a new book he had given her, or the music box he had fixed after noticing its broken hinge. Michael's daily visits became an unspoken routine. He had never been a man who carved out time for anything outside his work, yet now he found himself leaving the office earlier, rearranging meetings, and even ignoring calls during moments when Lily was speaking to him in her slow, deliberate way. She asked questions constantly, about buildings, about stars, about the ocean, about fear, and he answered every one with a patience that surprised even him. At the office, his employees whispered about his softened demeanor, about how the unapproachable CEO now occasionally smiled at nothing, lost in thought. But he paid them no attention. For the first time in years, he felt grounded by something real rather than by success, strategy, or profit. One afternoon, he invited Julia and Lily to visit the company headquarters again, assuring them the environment was now safe. Julia hesitated at first, remembering the humiliation and pain she had endured only days earlier, but Lily tugged her hand excitedly, wanting to see the big shiny building again now that the shadows had lifted. When they reached the lobby, employees straightened guiltily, many of them too ashamed to meet Julia's eyes. Michael noticed their unease and, with a single cold look, made it clear he expected respect. He led the two through the hallways personally, explaining things to Lily as though she were an honored guest rather than a child who had once wandered these same halls unnoticed. Lily listened with wide-eyed fascination, absorbing every detail like a sponge. They visited the office where the theft had taken place, though Michael paused at the doorway, watching Lily carefully to see if returning would frighten her. She hesitated only a little before stepping inside, and when she saw his reassuring nod, she relaxed. She approached the large window, her small hands resting on the sill, and stared at the city far below. "It looks different now," she said thoughtfully. "Before it looked scary. But now it looks big. And pretty." Michael stood beside her, following her gaze. "Things look different when you're not afraid," he said. Later, he took them to the cafeteria where the staff worked quietly, almost humbly, as if the building itself had been reprimanded. One employee approached Julia shyly, apologizing for assuming the worst. She accepted the apology politely, though Michael saw the pain behind her eyes. Lily didn't understand the apology, she simply smiled and offered the woman a sticker she had brought in her pocket. That innocent gesture softened the woman's expression instantly, and soon more employees approached, bringing small offerings, warm smiles, awkward attempts at redemption. For the first time, Julia felt seen rather than judged. As they walked back to Michael's office, Lily's hand slipped into his naturally, as though she had been doing this all her life. Julia noticed and expected him to pull away, worried he might feel uncomfortable being treated like family by a child who had none besides her. But he didn't. In fact, he adjusted his stride to match Lily's, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Inside his office, Lily climbed into his chair and spun once before stopping herself, looking up at him as though checking for permission. He chuckled, shaking his head amusedly. "You're the only person allowed to sit there and not get fired," he said. She beamed proudly, resting her elbows on the desk with an importance that made him laugh again. Julia watched the two of them with a quiet awe. It wasn't just that Michael was kind, it was that he was consistent. Some people offered kindness for show, but his was steady, thoughtful, rooted in something deeper. He wasn't playing a role. He genuinely cared for Lily. He listened to her, protected her, and encouraged her with a gentleness she'd rarely seen in men with power. That day, before leaving, Michael handed Julia an envelope. She looked at it warily until he insisted she open it. Inside was a document guaranteeing her job security, a salary increase, and an offer for employee family housing in a far better part of the city. Julia's hands shook, overwhelmed, and she tried to refuse it. "This is too much," she whispered. "You've already done enough." Michael spoke quietly, but with conviction. "I'm not paying you back, Julia. I'm doing what should have been done long ago. You work hard. You deserve safety and dignity. And your daughter deserves a future." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Lily reached up to wipe them with her tiny hand. "Mommy, don't cry," she said softly. "It's good now." Michael watched the scene unfold, feeling something warm settle in his chest. This simple moment, was worth more than any business victory he'd ever achieved. And he realized then that whatever role he had begun to play in this family's life, he wasn't ready to let go of it. As the evening sunlight flooded the office, painting long golden lines across the floor, Lily hopped off the chair and came to stand by him. "You'll come tomorrow, right?" she asked, tilting her head with innocent hope. He had once been a man whose schedule ruled him, whose world revolved around obligations and power. But now his answer came without hesitation. "Of course I will." Spring arrived like a quiet promise, softening the sharp edges of winter and painting the world in colors that felt almost symbolic, as though life itself had decided that the darkest chapter was finally over. For Michael, the shift in seasons coincided with a shift within himself, something steady, something warm, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He found himself anticipating his visits to Julia and Lily's new apartment, the one he had arranged discreetly but allowed Julia to believe was simply available employee housing. It was brighter, safer, cleaner, and the first time Lily stepped inside, she spun in a slow circle with awe in her eyes, as though she had entered a fairy tale home. Michael didn't stay long that first day, leaving them space to settle in, but the sound of Lily's delighted gasp lingered with him the entire night. Over the next months, their lives braided together in ways neither of them had planned. Michael remained a steady presence, guiding Lily's learning, helping her overcome the last traces of fear. He bought her new books, paints, and notebooks, though he always presented them casually, as though they were nothing more than tools she had inspired him to give. Julia found her footing too, growing comfortable in her new managerial role at the company. Employees who previously ignored her now greeted her with respect, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that had been buried for years beneath exhaustion and worry. Michael didn't flaunt his involvement in their transformation. To him, the reward lay in small moments, Lily's laughter echoing in the hallway, Julia smiling as she left work on time for once, the warmth in Lily's eyes every time she saw him and ran forward with the pure affection of a child who had learned she no longer had to be afraid. Lily started school in early spring. Michael insisted on accompanying them on the first day, though he let Julia walk her to the entrance alone, watching from a respectful distance. Lily kept turning around on the path to wave at him, her backpack bouncing with each enthusiastic step. When she finally disappeared inside the building, Michael felt an unexpected tightness in his chest, as if he had sent a part of himself into the world and could only hope it would be treated kindly. Julia noticed his expression and smiled softly. "She's not scared anymore," she told him. "She knows she has someone watching over her." He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. The truth was clear. Their bond grew deeper in the simplest of ways: shared dinners, stories read aloud, walks through the park where Lily would hold Michael's hand and point out birds or flowers with earnest excitement. He, a man who once lived in endless meetings and private jets, now found more comfort in listening to a child explain why clouds looked like sleeping animals. It grounded him. It softened him. It gave him a sense of belonging that he hadn't known he was missing. One evening, when Julia was running late from work, Michael picked Lily up from school for the first time. She sprinted across the courtyard the moment she saw him, her red backpack swinging wildly. "You came," she burst out, hugging his legs. "Of course I did," he said with a smile that reached his eyes, lifting her easily. They drove to a nearby cafe, where she told him all about her day, how she'd made a friend named Ellie, how she'd learned about planets, how her teacher said she had a very curious mind. Michael listened as though every detail were precious. Back at the apartment, Lily sat beside him on the couch, doodling while he reviewed some documents on his laptop. At one point she nudged him with her elbow, holding up a drawing. "This is you and me," she declared proudly. He took the paper gently. The picture showed a tall figure with dark hair holding the hand of a small blonde girl surrounded by hearts and stars. Something in his chest tightened with unexpected emotion. "Do you like being with me that much?" he asked quietly. She said without hesitation. "You always make me feel safe." The word struck deeper than she knew. He closed his laptop and pulled her close, resting his chin lightly on her head. He had spent a lifetime protecting assets, buildings, companies, but this was the first time protecting someone felt like a purpose rather than a responsibility. In that moment he understood something quietly profound: she had become the closest thing to family he had. And though he would never replace her missing father, he wanted to be the kind of figure she could depend on for the rest of her life. The weeks passed, and spring warmed into early summer. Julia invited Michael to a small celebration dinner, nothing fancy, just homemade pasta and a cake Lily insisted on decorating herself. When he arrived, Lily ran to the door with frosting smeared on her cheek, laughing as she pulled him inside. During dinner she chattered about school, her drawings, and how she wanted to become someone who helps people like Mr. Carter does. Julia almost choked on her drink at that, and Michael laughed, though the words touched him deeply. After the meal, Lily climbed onto his lap and rested her head against his chest. Her breathing slowed, her small body relaxing into the security she trusted without question. Julia watched them quietly, her eyes shining with something bittersweet: gratitude, admiration, and something else that she didn't dare voice out loud. Michael smoothed Lily's hair gently, his eyes soft. "She's come a long way," he murmured. "She's stronger than she knows," Julia replied. "You helped her see that." He met her gaze then, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of how deeply their lives had become entwined, how much they owed each other, how much they had grown because of one frightened whisper that changed everything. When it was time for him to leave, Lily stirred sleepily, clinging to him. "Don't go," she mumbled, half asleep. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I'll be back tomorrow." She nodded faintly, trusting him completely. As he stepped outside into the warm evening air, Julia standing beside him at the doorway, she said softly, "You've given us a new life." He shook his head gently, looking back at her with sincerity. "No. Lily gave me mine." Inside the apartment, Lily slept peacefully, knowing she was safe. Outside, Michael walked to his car feeling a sense of purpose that pulsed through him with every step, a purpose that had nothing to do with wealth or power. It had to do with a child who had once trembled in fear but now walked into the world with courage. A child who had found her voice. A child who had changed him forever. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm gold across the quiet street, Michael understood something undeniable: protecting Lily wasn't a chapter of his life. It was the beginning of a new one he intended to honor for the rest of his days.